Hi, I'm Gail Trent, and this is a sneak peek of Battered to Death. Myra sat down on one of the stools across the island from me. So, do you think anything crazy will happen at this cake thing? Crazy? I smiled. There's always something crazy going on in the cake world. That much competitive spirit combined with all that sugar makes for some interesting shenanigans. No. She waved away my interesting shenanigans with a double flick of her left wrist. I'm talking about criminal activity. I'm hoping that with all these people coming to little old Brea Ridge, Mark and I will at least have one intriguing case on our hands before the weekend is out. Myra, an attractive widow in her early to mid-60s, had been dating private investigator Mark Thompson for the past couple of months. Mark was good at his job and had plenty to keep him busy. He'd also had the good sense to keep Myra away from his investigations for the most part, but I suspected that was getting harder and harder for him to do. I didn't know Mark was looking for extra work, I said, gently picking up one of the orchid leaves and ruffling its edges with a bulb modeling tool. He's not, but he's told me that if the right kind of case comes along, he'll be glad to have me help out. The right kind of case. Well played, Mark, well played, I thought. I continued shaping the orchid. Well, good luck, but I can't see anything too awfully crazy happening over the course of the next few days. I mean, any criminal activity would be handled by the police, so I don't know what could happen in that short amount of time that would require the services of a private investigator. That's the kind of stuff people say just before disaster strikes, Myra said with a sage nod of her head that would have done any mountaintop guru proud. I guess you have a point there. I tried to change the subject. I hope the confectionery arts exhibit and cake competition will go well. I know there are some people in Brea Ridge who aren't happy that so many people will be converging on the town, but I think it will be good for the local economy, don't you? Well, honey, I hope it will. I know all the locals could use the money. Tanya's even put her a sign in her window that walk-ins are welcome and that they specialize in updos. I'd seen some of the updos that had been done at Tanya's tremendous tress-taming salon. The words beehive and shellac immediately came to mind. Hopefully she'll get some business, I said, trying not to shudder as I imagined scores of out-of-towners with 10-gallon updos that would stand up to hurricane-force winds. I really did hope Tanya would get some business, though. Maybe new customers would be good. They could look at their new hairstyles as part of the whole Brea Ridge Taste Bud Temptation experience. Myra looked down at the orchid I'd just finished. Well, that's pretty after all. I didn't know what you were going to wind up with when you started. Thanks. I've not done many orchids before, but I thought white orchids and peach roses would be a beautiful combination on the wedding cake I'm entering into the competition. I put the orchid on a foam square. Hopefully next year I'll be able to incorporate the Australian string work I'll be learning in Jordan Richards' 2-day class that starts tomorrow. Jordan Richards? Myra leaned back and frowned at me. He's that cake decorator from TV, right? I nodded. He's a renowned sugar artist. A lot of people are coming to the cake and confectionery arts exhibit and competition just to see him. He only accepted 10 students into his class. The ones who aren't able to get into the class will be attending his demonstrations at the show. Myra scoffed. Like he'll give 2 hoots of an owl's patoot. What? I chuckled. He's the one who's so mean on television. He makes that Gordon Ramsay fella look like Mary Poppins. I know he has the reputation of being hypercritical, and I struggled to find the right word. Myra didn't have to think about it as long and hard as I did. Jerk, creep, rabid, inconsiderate, rude, hypocritical ball of snot. Yeah, I guess you could call him that, or any of those things. But that might just be his TV persona. He may be nothing like that in real life. At least, I hope not. I held up my crossed index and middle fingers. Fingers crossed. Besides, I want to learn from the best. Oh, honey, Myra said. Sometimes you learn just as many bad things as good from the best. I put aside the orchid petal I was working on and asked Myra if she'd like something to drink. Experience had taught me that when Myra began an oh honey story, I might as well make myself comfortable and settle in for the long haul. No thanks, I'm fine, she said. I took a bottle of water from the fridge, uncapped it, took a long drink, and sat back down. Ruthie Mae Pruitt got to be pert near 50 years old before she learned to drive a car, Myra said. She didn't really feel the need to learn to drive until after her husband died. The fact that he died as the result of a car accident didn't really faze her, since he'd been walking and was hit by the car that had the accident. So she figured she might as well learn to drive in case she wanted to hit somebody? Or was it because she was afraid to walk wherever she wanted to go after her husband's death? I was being sarcastic, but Myra answered as if I weren't. Mainly, she didn't want to walk everywhere she wanted to go. And, of course, she got to thinking that driving herself could really broaden her horizons. She'd had to depend on someone else to take her wherever she'd wanted to go all her life. With her own driver's license, she could go anywhere she wanted. She'd even decided to visit her sister 2 states down, and 1 state over, in the upper corner of Georgia. That was a big deal to Ruthie Mae. So she started asking around town because she wanted to learn to drive from the best. Myra leveled her gaze at me. We were getting to the moral of the story. Now, everybody in Brea Ridge knew that Tony Barger was the best driver around. He could have probably gone pro on the NASCAR circuit or in that Indy 500 deal or some other big-time racing racket had it not been for his drinking problem. She continued. Please tell me Tony Barger wasn't drunk when he taught Ruthie how to drive, I said. Of course he wasn't. He had, however, tied one on and kept it on the entire weekend before he took Ruthie Mae for her first and only driving lesson on Monday afternoon. First and only? I asked. Did she decide she didn't like it after all? More than likely, that was her final thought. Neither of them made it out of that driving lesson alive. You see, Tony was definitely not drunk when he was driving. He took Ruthie Mae out to the parking lot of that closed-down grocery store where he was going to give her that first lesson in driving. He was very conscientious about it. He wanted to set a good example and that sort of thing. But the poor man did have the DT something fierce, she said, slowly shaking her head. Some say he might have even had a seizure. Wait a second. How do you know he had delirium tremens, I asked. Did someone see him having them? Nah, honey, it just stood to reason. What would you think of a man who was normally a drunk, who could drive circles around everybody else in Brea Ridge, suddenly took a relatively young widow for her first driving lesson and drove her into the side of an abandoned grocery store at 85 miles an hour, instantly killing them both? I think he was drunk at the time instead of suffering from withdrawals, I said. That's because you didn't know Tony. He could drive just as good drunk as he could sober, Myra said. In fact, he drove better drunk than some people could drive sober. And had he been drunk, the accident never would have happened. I took another drink of my water, figuring it was useless to argue the point with her. Even though I found it nearly impossible to believe that an intoxicated man could outdrive most of the sober citizens of Brea Ridge, why argue? After all, what difference did it make? Plus, there was no alcohol in his system at the time of the accident, Myra went on. It was in the newspaper. That's how everybody knew it wasn't the alcohol that caused the wreck, but the fact that he'd been off it since Sunday night that had been the problem. So you see, sometimes learning from the best isn't all that it cracked up to be. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Hopefully Chef Richards won't be drunk, or sober, or in any kind of condition that would hinder him from instructing us all in the fine art of Australian string work. And even if he is, the worst he can do is frost us to death, right? She laughed. I guess so. Just be careful he doesn't put you in a sugar coma. Or cause me to gain 10 pounds overnight, I said. Oh, honey, that's my worst nightmare. Well, one of them anyway. At the time, I didn't realize that taking a cake decorating class from Jordan Richards would not be too different from hitting a brick wall at 85 miles an hour. We live and we learn. And to Myra's credit, it turned out that sometimes learning from the best was not everything you thought it would be.